Imagine waking up one morning. The roads that once carried merchants are empty. The ports that connected continents have fallen silent. The greatest cities on Earth are burning. Kings who ruled for decades have disappeared without a trace. Entire civilizations, some that had stood for hundreds of years, are collapsing almost at the same time. No one knows exactly why. This isn't the plot of an apocalypse movie. It happened over 3,000 years ago. Within only a few decades, kingdoms that dominated the ancient world simply vanished. The mighty Hittite Empire disappeared from history. The great Mycenaean palaces of Greece were reduced to ashes. Powerful cities across the eastern Mediterranean were abandoned. Trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers suddenly broke apart. Writing itself disappeared from entire regions. For centuries afterward, people would call it a dark age. But here's the strangest part. Ancient Egypt, the strongest civilization on Earth, barely survived. Its records describe terrifying invaders arriving from the sea. Warriors with unknown origins. No homeland, no king, no empire, only destruction. Today, historians call them the Sea Peoples. But were they really responsible? Or were they only the final blow to a civilization that had already begun to collapse from within? Because recent archaeological discoveries suggest something even more disturbing. This may not have been one disaster. It may have been the first global collapse in human history. And if that's true, then the ancient world didn't fall because of one enemy. It fell because everything depended on everything else. And when one piece broke, the entire world came crashing down. Before we uncover what really happened, I have a question for you. If you could witness one moment in ancient history, what would it be? The construction of the Great Pyramid? The burning of the Library of Alexandria? Or the final days of the Bronze Age? Pause for a second and leave your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to see which moment history fascinates you the most. Now, let's continue. 3,000 years ago, long before Rome, before Alexander the Great, before the Persian Empire, there already existed a world connected in ways that would have felt surprisingly modern. This was the Late Bronze Age, and for the people living in it, the future looked unstoppable. Across the eastern Mediterranean, enormous kingdoms dominated the landscape. The Egyptians ruled the fertile Nile Valley. The Hittites controlled much of Anatolia. The Mycenaeans governed powerful palace kingdoms across Greece. The Assyrians were rising in Mesopotamia. The kingdom of Ugarit had become one of the busiest ports in the ancient world. Farther east, Babylon remained a center of culture, law, and learning. These weren't isolated civilizations. They were partners, competitors, and sometimes bitter enemies. But above everything else, they were connected. Thousands of ships crossed the Mediterranean every year. Caravans traveled across deserts carrying goods worth fortunes. Royal messengers moved constantly between kingdoms. Diplomats exchanged letters. Merchants negotiated trade agreements. Princesses married foreign kings to secure peace. For perhaps the first time in history, the great powers of the world had become economically dependent on one another. A palace in Greece might use copper mined in Cyprus. That copper would be mixed with tin brought from hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of kilometers away. Together, they created bronze, the metal that built civilizations. Bronze wasn't just another material. It made stronger swords, better armor, more efficient farming tools, and weapons capable of deciding entire wars. But bronze had one dangerous weakness. No kingdom possessed all the ingredients needed to make it. Copper came from one region, tin from another. The trade routes connecting them stretched across mountains, deserts, and seas. If even one of those routes failed, production slowed. If several failed, entire economies stopped. Without realizing it, the ancient world had created something remarkably similar to a modern global supply chain. Prosperity depended on constant movement. Goods, people, information. Every kingdom trusted that tomorrow's ships would arrive just as yesterday's had. They couldn't imagine a world where they wouldn't, because for generations, they always had. Archaeologists have uncovered astonishing evidence of this interconnected world. One of the greatest discoveries came from a shipwreck lying beneath the waters near the coast of present-day Turkey. Known today as the Uluburun shipwreck, it carried an extraordinary cargo: copper ingots from Cyprus, tin from distant lands, ivory from Africa, glass from Egypt, jewelry, luxury goods, weapons, exotic spices, even precious resins used in religious ceremonies. One single ship, carrying products gathered from across 3 continents. It was proof that the Bronze Age wasn't a collection of isolated kingdoms. It was an international economy. And like every interconnected economy, its greatest strength would eventually become its greatest weakness. Because when nations depend on each other for everything, they also become vulnerable to everything. A failed harvest in one kingdom could create famine in another. Piracy in one sea could stop factories hundreds of kilometers away. One political crisis could trigger another. The system had become incredibly efficient, but efficiency often comes at the cost of resilience. The entire world had unknowingly built itself like a line of standing dominoes. As long as every piece remained upright, the system appeared unbreakable. But no one had asked the obvious question: what happens when the first domino falls? At first, nothing seemed unusual. The ships still sailed. The palaces were still full. The kings still ruled from magnificent capitals. Life continued as it always had. But beneath the surface, the foundations of an entire civilization were beginning to crack. It started with something that almost never appears in history books: letters. Not grand declarations from emperors, not heroic speeches before battle, just ordinary messages, written by frightened rulers asking for help. One king pleaded for grain, another begged for soldiers. Others wrote desperate requests for bronze, for timber, for food. Some letters never received a reply. Today, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of these clay tablets. They're not stories written centuries later. They're real conversations between kings, recorded as the crisis unfolded. And when they're placed together, they read less like diplomacy and more like emergency calls from a civilization slowly coming apart. One ruler writes that enemy ships have appeared along the coast. Another warns that trade routes are no longer safe. A governor reports that villages have been abandoned. Elsewhere, harvests begin to fail. One problem becomes two become five become dozens. None of these disasters are large enough to destroy the Bronze Age on their own. That's what makes this collapse so difficult to understand. Historians once searched for a single cause: one invasion, one war, one earthquake, one plague. But archaeology tells a different story. Imagine removing a single brick from a wall. Nothing happens. Remove another, and the wall still stands. Remove 10, then 20, and suddenly the entire structure collapses. Not because of the final brick, but because too many had already disappeared. The Bronze Age worked the same way. Trade depended on peace. Peace depended on strong kingdoms. Strong kingdoms depended on food. Food depended on stable weather. Armies depended on bronze. Bronze depended on trade. Every part of the system supported every other part, which meant every failure created another. A drought reduced harvests. Hungry people migrated. Migration created conflict. Conflict disrupted trade. Trade shortages weakened armies. Weaker armies encouraged raids. Raids destroyed more trade. The cycle fed itself. No one planned this. No single enemy controlled it. The collapse was becoming something far more dangerous. A chain reaction. And then, the evidence becomes even stranger. Because as kingdoms struggled to survive, an entirely new threat began appearing along the Mediterranean coast. Not merchants, not diplomats, not ambassadors, warriors, entire fleets of them. No kingdom knew exactly where they came from. Some Egyptian records described them as people arriving from islands in the sea. Others simply called them invaders. Modern historians would later give them a name that still sparks debate today: the Sea Peoples. Who they were, where they came from, and whether they caused the collapse, or were themselves victims of it, remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. And that mystery begins with a kingdom that sent one final message before it disappeared forever. For centuries, the city of Ugarit stood at the center of the ancient world. Its harbor welcomed ships from Egypt, Cyprus, Crete, the Hittite Empire, and kingdoms stretching far beyond the horizon. Inside its markets, merchants spoke different languages. Its warehouses overflowed with copper, tin, ivory, cedarwood, glass, fine textiles, and luxury goods from across 3 continents. Everything a great civilization needed passed through Ugarit. Its kings believed they lived in an age of prosperity that would never end. Then, everything changed. It didn't happen overnight. Trade became slower. Fewer ships entered the harbor. Some merchants never returned. The roads that had once carried endless caravans became increasingly dangerous. Rumors spread faster than goods. Entire towns were said to have disappeared. At first, people dismissed them. Surely another kingdom would restore order. Surely the great empires would intervene. After all, they always had. But this time, no one came. Then one day, lookouts standing above the city walls spotted sails on the horizon. At first, that wasn't unusual. Ugarit depended on ships. Ships brought wealth. Ships brought news. Ships brought life. But these ships were different. They didn't enter the harbor. They didn't raise diplomatic banners. They came ready for war. As panic spread through the city, officials rushed to write messages to neighboring kingdoms. One surviving letter, discovered more than 3,000 years later beneath the ruins of the city, captures the fear of those final days. It reads, "Enemy ships have come. They have set my cities on fire and done great harm to my land. The writer wasn't recording history. He was asking for help. Urgently, desperately. Another message pleaded for military assistance. The city's defenses were weak. Its army was away. Its allies were nowhere to be found. Some historians believe Ugarit soldiers had been sent north to support the Hittite Empire, leaving their own homeland dangerously exposed. Whether that was the case or not, one fact is beyond dispute. The help they requested never arrived. The messages stopped. The harbor fell silent. The fires began. Archaeologists excavating Ugarit found thick layers of ash covering the city, collapsed buildings, burned temples, arrowheads scattered through the streets, homes abandoned exactly where people had left them. It wasn't the slow decline of an aging civilization. It was sudden, violent, final. Yet the greatest irony was hidden beneath the destruction. The flames that consumed Ugarit also baked its clay tablets harder than ever before. Instead of turning to dust, they survived. Thousands of years later, those same letters became eyewitness testimony from a civilization experiencing its final hours. Not mythology, not legend, real people, writing real messages, while their world was ending around them. And Ugarit was only one city. Across the eastern Mediterranean, dozens of others suffered the same fate. Some vanished so completely, their names were forgotten for centuries. The question is, who had the power to destroy so many kingdoms? In such a short span of time, the Egyptians believed they knew the answer. They carved it into the walls of their temples. They spoke of a mysterious enemy, arriving from the sea, an enemy unlike any they had fought before. History remembers them by a name that still fascinates archaeologists today: the Sea Peoples. History has a habit of surprising us. The deeper we dig, the more complicated the answers become. If you're enjoying documentaries that go beyond the myths and focus on what historians and archaeologists actually know, take a second to support the channel. A simple like tells YouTube that these stories deserve to reach more people. Now, because the biggest surprise is still ahead. For more than 3,000 years, they have remained one of history's greatest mysteries. They left behind no empire, no capital city, no royal tombs, no written records describing who they were or where they came from. Everything we know about them comes from the civilizations that feared them. The Egyptians gave them a name. Today, we call them the Sea Peoples. Most of what survives comes from the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III. On the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, enormous reliefs depict a desperate battle unlike anything Egypt had fought before. Warships crash into one another on the Nile. Archers release volleys of arrows from the riverbanks. Foreign warriors, wearing distinctive feathered headdresses and carrying round shields, fight with astonishing determination. The accompanying inscriptions describe a terrifying invasion. They claim that entire kingdoms had already fallen before these enemies reached Egypt. The Hittites, the kingdoms of Anatolia, cities across the Levant. According to the Egyptians, they had all been swept away. Then, the invaders came for Egypt. But this was no ordinary army. Unlike previous enemies, they didn't arrive alone. The reliefs show something unusual. Women, children, ox carts loaded with possessions, entire families moving together. It looked less like a military campaign and more like an entire population searching for a new home. That single detail has transformed how many historians think about the Sea Peoples. Were they truly conquerors? Or were they refugees, forced to abandon lands that had already become impossible to live in? No one knows for certain. Some researchers believe they came from the Aegean world. Others point toward Western Anatolia. Some suggest Cyprus. Others argue they were never one people at all, but many different groups brought together by the same catastrophe. Imagine what the Mediterranean may have looked like at the time. Harvests failing, trade collapsing, cities burning, kingdoms disappearing. If your homeland could no longer feed your family, where would you go? Would you stay and starve? Or would you gather everything you owned, place your children on wagons, board ships, and search for somewhere safer? Suddenly, the Sea Peoples begin to look less like mysterious villains and more like desperate survivors. But desperation can be just as destructive as conquest. Entire fleets moving across the Mediterranean would have needed food, water, wood, and shelter. If peaceful trade was no longer possible, they may have taken what they needed by force. Every raid weakened another city. Every burning port interrupted more trade. Every collapse created more refugees. And every new refugee group added even more pressure to an already failing world. The cycle fed itself. Egypt, however, was different. Unlike many of its neighbors, it still possessed a powerful army. Ramesses III understood that waiting behind city walls would not save his kingdom. If the Sea Peoples reached the heart of Egypt, the empire itself might disappear. Instead, he prepared one of the most remarkable defensive operations of the ancient world. He positioned archers along the banks of the Nile. His fleet waited in hidden positions. The river itself became a trap. When the invading ships entered Egyptian waters, they found themselves surrounded. Arrows rained down from both sides. Egyptian vessels rammed enemy ships at close range. The battle descended into chaos. According to Egyptian records, Ramesses III won a decisive victory. Egypt survived, but victory came at a terrible cost, because although the pharaoh defended his borders, he could not save the world beyond them. By the time the fighting ended, many of the great kingdoms that had once surrounded Egypt were already gone. The sea peoples had become the face of the catastrophe, but were they really its cause? Or had they simply arrived after the collapse had already begun? That question would force historians to rethink everything they believed about the end of the Bronze Age, because the evidence buried beneath ruined cities tells a story far more complicated than any ancient inscription could ever reveal. If history were a movie, this is where the villain would be revealed. One enemy, one battle, one catastrophic event that brought civilization to its knees. But history is rarely that simple, and the Bronze Age collapse refuses to fit into a single explanation. For decades, historians searched for one cause. Some blamed the sea peoples, others pointed to earthquakes. Some believed famine destroyed the kingdoms from within. Others argued that climate change was the true culprit. Each theory explained part of the story. None explained all of it. Then archaeology began uncovering evidence from across the Mediterranean. Not from one city, not from one kingdom, but from dozens. When researchers compared those discoveries, a different picture began to emerge. The collapse wasn't caused by one disaster. It was caused by many, striking at nearly the same time. The first warning may have come from the sky. Ancient pollen trapped beneath lake beds, tree ring studies, and sediment records all point toward a prolonged period of drought in parts of the eastern Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age. Less rain meant smaller harvests. Smaller harvests meant hunger. And hunger has a way of turning stable societies into desperate ones. When food becomes scarce, people don't simply wait. They migrate. They compete. They fight. At the same time, the earth itself may have turned against them. Several major cities show evidence of earthquake damage dating to roughly the same period. Some archaeologists have even proposed an earthquake storm, a series of powerful earthquakes striking fault lines across the eastern Mediterranean over several decades. Not every historian agrees with this idea, but there is little doubt that earthquakes damaged cities already struggling under enormous pressure. Then came economic collapse. For centuries, bronze had powered civilization, but producing bronze required two essential metals: copper and tin. Neither was useful without the other, and they rarely came from the same place. If just one trade route failed, workshops slowed. If several failed, weapons couldn't be replaced. Farmers lost tools. Construction stopped. Entire industries froze. The very network that had created prosperity had become a trap. Every interruption spread outward like ripples across water. Then, another problem emerged: internal rebellion. As food became scarce, taxes became harder to collect. Kings struggled to pay soldiers. Local governors became more independent. Some cities may have revolted against the very rulers meant to protect them. When central authority weakens, power doesn't disappear. It fragments. Suddenly, every kingdom was fighting on multiple fronts: against invaders, against hunger, against economic collapse, against political instability, against nature itself. No civilization, no matter how powerful, could absorb all of those shocks forever. Think of it like a massive stone arch. For centuries, every stone supported the others. Remove one, and nothing happens. Remove another, and it still stands. But eventually, there comes a moment when removing just one more stone causes the entire structure to collapse. Not because that final stone was special, but because the system had already reached its limit. That may be exactly what happened to the Bronze Age. The sea peoples were not necessarily the first stone. Neither was drought, or famine, or earthquakes, or rebellion. Together, they became something far more destructive. A perfect storm. One crisis amplified the next. A drought reduced harvests. Hungry populations migrated. Migration fueled conflict. Conflict disrupted trade. Trade shortages weakened armies. Weaker armies encouraged raids. Raids destroyed more cities. Destroyed cities ended more trade. The cycle repeated, again and again, until an entire civilization reached the point where recovery was no longer possible. This is why historians today increasingly describe the Bronze Age collapse, not as a single disaster, but as a systemic collapse. A civilization so interconnected that once enough pieces failed, everything else followed. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is how familiar that sounds. The kingdoms of the Bronze Age believed their world was too advanced, too wealthy, too connected, to ever truly collapse. They were wrong. The question is, what happened after the world they built disappeared? Because civilization didn't end in 1177 BC. It simply became something very different. When the fires finally died, there was no celebration, no treaty, no king declaring victory, only silence. Across the eastern Mediterranean, cities that had once echoed with merchants, craftsmen, diplomats, and soldiers became empty ruins. Some would never be rebuilt. Others would lie buried beneath the earth for thousands of years before archaeologists uncovered them again. Entire kingdoms simply disappeared from history. The mighty Hittite Empire, one of the great superpowers of the Bronze Age, vanished so completely that for centuries, people forgot it had ever existed. Its capital, Hattusa, was abandoned. Its palaces fell into ruin. Its royal archives were left buried beneath collapsed stone walls. In Greece, the magnificent Mycenaean palace kingdoms met a similar fate. The great centers of Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and many others were destroyed or abandoned. The bureaucracies that had governed them disappeared almost overnight. And with them, something even more extraordinary was lost: writing. The Mycenaeans used a script known today as Linear B to record taxes, trade, inventories, and royal administration. After the collapse, that writing system vanished. Not because someone banned it, because the people who knew how to read and write it were gone. For nearly 400 years, Greece entered what historians now call the Greek Dark Age. Writing disappeared. International trade shrank dramatically. Monumental architecture almost ceased. Population declined across many regions. The world became smaller, poorer, quieter. Imagine living through that transformation. Your grandparents remembered bustling ports filled with ships from distant kingdoms. Your parents watched those ships stop coming. You grew up surrounded by abandoned palaces whose builders had become legends. Within only a few generations, history itself began to fade. Stories replaced records. Memory replaced documentation. Facts became myths. Some of the greatest achievements of the Bronze Age survived only as fragments passed from one generation to the next. Centuries later, those fragments may have inspired the epic poems of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, echoes of a world that had already vanished. But even as old kingdoms disappeared, new societies slowly began to emerge. In the ruins of collapsed empires, small communities adapted. New trade routes formed. Iron gradually replaced bronze. Local leaders replaced imperial bureaucracies. Civilization wasn't reborn overnight. It rebuilt itself piece by piece, generation by generation. The Bronze Age had ended. The Iron Age had begun. History had not stopped. It had changed direction. And that may be the most important lesson of all. Because civilizations rarely disappear in a single moment. They transform, often so slowly that the people living through the change barely notice it happening. The Bronze Age world was gone, but humanity endured. It always does. The real question isn't whether civilizations survive forever. None do. The question is, what lessons survive after they're gone? Because more than 3,000 years later, the story of the Bronze Age collapse still has something to teach us. And that lesson may be more relevant today than ever before. More than 3,000 years have passed. Since the Bronze Age collapse, the cities have become ruins. The kings have turned into names carved on broken stone. The ships that once crossed the Mediterranean now lie beneath the sea. Yet the questions raised by their world have never disappeared. For generations, people believed civilization was almost impossible to destroy. After all, the Bronze Age world had everything: powerful empires, advanced engineering, international trade, professional armies, diplomatic alliances, complex economies. To the people living then, their civilization probably felt permanent. It wasn't. The most remarkable discovery archaeologists have made isn't a palace, or a treasure, or a forgotten tomb. It's something much simpler. No single event destroyed the Bronze Age. There was no one villain, no final battle, no single day when the ancient world suddenly ended. Instead, a series of crises overlapped. Each one weakened the next. A drought made harvests smaller. Smaller harvests increased migration. Migration created conflict. Conflict disrupted trade. Trade shortages weakened kingdoms. Weaker kingdoms became easier to attack. The system slowly lost its ability to recover, not because one problem was impossible to solve, but because too many problems arrived at the same time. That may be the true legacy of the Bronze Age collapse. Not that civilizations are fragile, but that they are connected. Every civilization is built on thousands of invisible relationships. Farmers supplying cities, merchants connecting continents, governments maintaining order, workers building infrastructure, families passing knowledge to the next generation. Most of the time, those connections are invisible. until they begin to disappear. The people living in Ugarit couldn't see the drought hundreds of kilometers away. The farmers struggling through failed harvests couldn't see the political crisis inside distant palaces. The king defending his borders couldn't predict that another kingdom had already fallen. Each person experienced only one small piece of a much larger story. Only thousands of years later, with archaeology, satellite imagery, climate science, and countless excavations, can we finally step back and see the entire picture? Perhaps that's why this event continues to fascinate historians. Not because it was the end of civilization, but because it reminds us that history is rarely driven by one dramatic moment. History changes when countless small events, each insignificant on their own, begin reinforcing one another. The Bronze Age wasn't erased because its people lacked intelligence. They built extraordinary cities, mastered engineering, created international diplomacy, developed writing systems, connected continents through trade. Their achievements transformed human history. Yet even the most advanced civilization of its age could not control every force acting upon it. Nature, politics, economics, human ambition, migration, war. Together, they reshaped the world. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that collapse was never the end of the story. From the ashes of the Bronze Age, new kingdoms emerged. The Phoenicians expanded across the Mediterranean. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah appeared in the historical record. Iron technology spread across continents. Centuries later, classical Greece would rise, then Rome, then countless civilizations after them. History did not stop. It evolved. The world that disappeared around 1177 BC was not humanity's final chapter. It was the closing of one age and the beginning of another. Maybe that's why we still tell this story today. Not because we're fascinated by ruins, but because every civilization eventually asks the same question. How long can what we've built truly last? The people of the Bronze Age believed the answer was forever. History gave them a different one. And perhaps that's the most timeless lesson they left behind. The people of the Bronze Age believed their world would last forever. History proved otherwise, but their story survived. Not every week, we uncover the mysteries, the forgotten civilizations, the decisive battles, and the untold stories that shaped our world. So if you enjoyed this journey, take a moment to subscribe and become part of it. And if this documentary taught you something new, leave a like. It helps these stories reach thousands of other history enthusiasts who might never have discovered them otherwise. Finally, I'd like to leave you with one question. What historical mystery should we investigate next? The Sea Peoples? The disappearance of the Hittite Empire? The Library of Alexandria? Or something completely different? Leave your suggestion in the comments. I read every one of them, and many of our future documentaries will be inspired by your ideas.